Hello and welcome to a truly special edition of 90 Minutes Africa. My name is Okey Ndibe. Today is my pleasure to stand in for the usual host of the show, Rudolph Okonkwo. And indeed, in what is going to be a monumental reversal of roles, Rudolph has agreed to come on his show as the guest, and I will be the host, and I will be moderating the conversation with Rudolph. So it's a delight to do this, and without much ado, I'd like to invite you, Rudolph Okonkwo, to please join the show and welcome.
Waiting. This is interesting. So
yes,
thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, there's been a conversation between Rudolph and me that's been going on for, I think, more than a year now since my last appearance on the show as a guest. And Rudolph has wanted me to come back. And for all kinds of reasons, I have not been able to come back. And part of, in recent times, I've given Rudolph the very sound reason that, in a sense, I've come to the conclusion that I don't understand Nigeria anymore. So I feel incompetent to pronounce on issues pertaining to Nigeria. And Rudolph has come up with different suggestions, that we could talk about academia. Both of us are teachers at the college level, that we could talk about our experiences teaching in America. And in my case, I've also been a professor for a year in Nigeria as a Fulbright scholar at the University of Lagos. So he wanted me to come on and sort of have a conversation about the variety of experiences in the different locations where I have been a professor. That conversation will come up at some point, but I felt that there are actually compelling reasons to, as it were, put Rudolph on the hot seat. I'd like to tease out for our audience this really, for me, spectacular phenomenon called Rudolph Okonkwo, or as many of his fans know him, Dr. Damages. So Dr. Damages is a real pleasure for me to be in this unfamiliar place and for you to be in your unfamiliar seat as a guest. So welcome.
Thank you. Let me explain that I wanted to have a conversation with Okey the way Nikki Giovanni had a conversation with James Brown.
And that will happen at some other date, not today.
That was all I wanted to do. I don't know, but
that will happen. That will happen. So we'll see how this works out. And at some future date, maybe in a few years, we'll have the Nikki Giovanni, James Baldwin conversation. Okay, so let me begin with this. Your show has become, for many of us, almost an addictive. It's not almost. It's become an addictive treat for Nigerians. So I'd like to begin by saying, by asking you, what was at the back of your mind when you conceived this show, 90 Minutes Africa?
Oh, yeah, thank you. It wasn't just me. It was Chido Onoma. We came together and we said we would like to have an interview program where we will give intellectuals, newsmakers, politicians, artists, musicians, different people opportunity to come on and talk. Unlike what they get when they go to Nigerian TV or African TV stations, or anywhere in the world really, where they give you just 15 minutes or best 30 minutes. We said we will give 90 minutes. And the idea was also that we talk to the guest for an hour and then invite our audience to join in the conversation. Sometimes the audience, they have the better questions
Yes.
than we have. So that was the idea that we had, and we started. Um,
Yes, because I remember that, so thank you for bringing in the fact that you actually had a partner
yes.
who, with you, became the Jean Provocateur for this really thrilling, sometimes disturbing show, in terms of um, the kind of heat that it generates.
I'm sweating here.
You can imagine.
I'm sweating here.
Yes. So Chido Anoma, I remember that in the first months after they take up the program, that both of you co-hosted the program. So I know the story sort of tangentially, but could you speak about how it came about that Chido stopped being a regular as a host on the program?
Oh, yeah. Essentially, what happened was, along the way, he started writing a book, and we are still waiting for him to finish. You know how these things are.
Yes.
But also, he has a full-time job. He runs a non-profit, so he's busy. So this was an additional burden. But the book was what made him take a leave of absence to finish the book.
So are you expecting that at some point he'll return?
I may fire him.
Well, we're going to get into that because
I'm-
in about a month, we're going to get back in the White House somebody who is famous for saying to people,
You're
"You're
fired.
fired." But we'll get to
Yeah,
Trump
yeah.
a bit
No,
later.
it,
Yeah.
I haven't discussed with him. Every week people now make fun of me because every week we say that my co-host Chido Onoma is on assignment, and
Yeah.
people make fun of him. He's always on assignment.
Yes.
When is he
Yes.
coming back?
Yes.
We
No.
haven't discussed that.
Yeah, I do know that Chido, who is also a friend, even though we haven't spoken in a while, Chido is quite busy. But all of us are really, really busy, right? I know that you wear different caps. You teach at a college, and you have other um, um,
Engagements
engagements,
and entanglements,
entanglements.
not just
Yes,
engagements,
not to say
entanglements.
not to go to the kind of errands that our spouses will send us on, which always take priority, you know. But let me ask. So you had this conception when you started the show, um, and of course it exploded. So initially you called it 90-minute Africa because it was projected that you would interview a guest for an hour, that you would bring in a live audience to bring in questions and remarks and so on. I remember the first time I was on the show, you had told me that it was going to be an hour and a half. I think I ended up being there for more than 3 hours, perhaps.
I think
uh,
you were the one that said that's the stage
Precisely.
for.
So I exploded this whole thing, and I think we did 3.5, if not close to 4 hours. And I thought it was a scandal. I thought that people were going to protest and say, "No, this is an egregious redefinition of an hour and a half, right? 90 minutes." But then I have. I'm aware of episodes that went on for for
8 hours,
8 hours and
10
so on,
hours. Yeah, we
and ten
had
hours.
Prince
So
Adebayo.
yes, yeah, the president, that's the presidential candidate,
Yeah,
right? Who I
we,
because
we
I
called it
remember
we called it
watching.
we
I
called it 100 questions in
Yes,
100 hours.
yes, I remember watching that show, and I would go off on an errand and come back, and the
And it's
guy was
still on.
still there, and I went off again and came back, and it was still there. So it just blew my mind. So can you speak to clearly, because what's at play is that your show has become addictive. And given the colossal disappointment that many Nigerians feel about their country, how do you account for the fact that Nigerians actually enjoy talking about this country that brings them so much pain, as it were?
Yeah, it's been described in so many ways. For most of them, it's an opportunity for them to vent. It's also an opportunity to listen to people with different viewpoints, which is not very popular and common.
Mm-hmm.
Most people now bring around themselves people who agree with them, not people who disagree with them. But when you come on the show, you are going to see people who will disagree with you. So a lot of people like that idea. They have opportunity to challenge opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And what has happened is that our guests, when they come on, they know they have the time. They have the time to expand on the ideas. And some of them enjoy taking on the audience who will come
Mm-hmm.
on to ask them questions, pointed questions.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I find it hard. I try to tell the guests to end it, that we have to go. I'm the one that is interested in going. They don't want to. They say let them talk, let them talk,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's amazing. So it gives opportunity to people who are um, constrained by the time that regular TV will give them. So
Mm-hmm.
they enjoy it, and our people
Mm-hmm.
enjoy coming on and having opportunities to
Mm-hmm.
talk to people. They sometimes they only see them on TV.
Mm-hmm. So, what have you learned as a person? Of course, this is your show, and so you have a certain level of intimacy with what's going on. Have you had time to sort of step back and look at the run of the show? I think that sometime early next year will be at the third anniversary of the show. When is the third anniversary?
It should be March, sometime in March. I
Okay,
think
sometime in
11th.
March.
Yeah.
So 3 years, almost 3 years is a very respectable run for a show like this one. So have you had the occasion to step back and look at what have you learned about our country, about this space that we call Nigeria? What are some of the lessons that you picked up from engaging with your guests as well as the larger body of interlocutors who join the show?
Yeah. I think the first thing is we think that we talk a lot and we have conversations, but I don't think we have enough of that conversations. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I see people come up and say certain things that I would think that if they've been part of the conversation going on across the country, they wouldn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Something that an idea that has been put out and been dismissed,
Mm-hmm.
something that people you can say at a different average level of engagement in Nigeria will have concluded that this is not true or not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
But people still make those statements when they come on the show. So it tells me that the conversations are not happening the way they should, maybe, or across the board the way you think they are happening.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I noticed something that everybody always, if you follow Nigeria the way we follow it, that the solutions and the ideas are always there. The issue is about implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So I see smart people come on the show. At the end, one of the interesting things we do at the end is when the guest is out, we do a review of what happened, feedback, what people are taking away from the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And you find that a lot of people will feel like, why is this person not the one running the country? Why is this person not the governor? Why is this person? So we have people, we have talents, but they just don't know, or there is no way for them to get to the front
Mm-hmm.
of the seat and to run things. So they remain armchair critics, throwing out ideas that nobody's really interested in.
Let me pause you there because I know you have a lot more to say, but I'd like to follow up with questions related to the insights that you've offered. Um, One is that you said that perhaps we don't have enough conversations. And yet, as you know, I wrote a weekly column on Nigerian politics for close to 20 years. I think it was 18 years. Um, and then broke off and came back. And only recently, early this year or middle of this year, I decided to take a long sabbatical from writing about Nigeria. And I remember that a predictable refrain that one gets from Nigerians when, in the many years that I wrote a weekly column, was Nigerians would say, "Hey, um, uh, we have enough of talking, as it were, So it's the doing." Okay. Um, so it struck me as particularly interesting that you said we don't talk enough. We haven't talked enough. We don't talk enough about our problems. Could you spend some time sort of breaking that down? What does it mean? Because again, if you've been in any space with Nigerians, whether you go to a Nigerian bar, a Nigerian restaurant, a Nigerian birthday party, a Nigerian church, politics quickly percolates to the fore, and so Nigerians talk a lot about the issues pressing on their lives in Nigeria. So I'd like to hear some more about this idea that we don't talk enough.
Oh, I'll give you an example of what I mean. So for 3 years, we've done this. And one of the things we noticed is that there are some segments of the population that are not involved in the conversation.
Mhm.
So a good example, people from the north.
Mhm.
We've been trying to figure out why is it that they don't feel comfortable in joining our conversation. There are some who do join, but not a lot.
Mhm.
You can't remove that segment of the society and hope to accomplish something for the whole nation.
Mhm.
So there's no conversation that is going across every segment. Women are not involved as much as we would like them to be involved. And you
Mhm.
can't build a nation,
Mhm.
you can't reform a nation if it's only men that are having a conversation about what should be done.
Mhm.
So, and then of course, the people who are involved in the conversation, they find out that the line of division is so wide. And there are no people in the middle who are trying to get the ideas from different sections and
Mhm.
bring it together and
Mhm.
then formulate what should be done next. So that is that those parts of typical conversation that could lead to change, they are
Mhm.
not happening.
Mhm.
So the fact that we are shouting and abusing each other does not, it's not the whole range of what the
Mhm.
conversation should be. One
Mhm.
is the people who should be involved. Everybody is not involved in that conversation, and there are no people to follow up
Mhm.
from just laying out the issues. Sometimes we throw out the solutions, but
Mhm.
there's no follow up.
Yes.
So, yeah, so for you to achieve anything, you have to take care of those aspects.
Wonderful. So another follow-up that I'd like to make relates to the point that you made that Nigeria is a country that's rich in talent, okay, and that often those who appear as guests in your show elicit the response from the audience that these are the kinds of people who should be running the country. And in the years that I've written about Nigeria, this is a particular paradox that I've noted that in every sector of human endeavor, whether you're talking about medicine, you're talking about literature, academia, engineering, and so on, that you find Nigerians who are not only present, but often stand out, okay, in the world on a global level. And yet, when we come to the critical sector of the leadership of the country, the leadership of the different states, the leadership of the local governments in the country, somehow we seem to choose what I'll call our mediocrities, you see. So, how do you personally account for this paradox? The fact that a country that knows what talent looks like, a country that um, distinguishes itself in other sectors, somehow settles again and again for the most depraved and the most unimpressive and the most mediocre elements when it comes to leadership, political
Oh,
leadership.
yeah, it's very easy to see why it's happening. The one is that I define Nigeria as a failed nation that
Mhm,
works for the people that failed it. So because it works for them,
mhm,
they have no incentive to make that country work. And
mhm,
for the rest, who could not find a way to be part of that, they leave.
mhm,
Most of the successful people we are talking about, most of them
mhm,
are out of the country.
mhm,
So they leave, and by leaving, you leave the space
mhm,
for the same people to dominate.
mhm,
So that makes it very difficult for when you have small elements now. You don't have the critical mass that is needed to effect a change at home.
mhm, mhm,
So that's the first thing that is going on. The second thing is that the people at home, most of them, um, they they don't know. Remember, the population of Nigeria, that's 75% of the Nigerian population, they are under 30.
mhm.
So these people did not know Zik, they did not
Yeah.
know Awo, they did not know Tafawa Balewa, So their role models are people that we see that failed that country. I saw a video that I played yesterday on the show
Mhm,
where the president, Tinubu, was going somewhere in Lagos, and the convoy the vehicles were just passing, and this guy on the roadside was just hailing him. This is the greatest man. He
yeah.
is number one, or the
Mhm,
level, different levels.
mhm,
He's not thinking about this is my money that they are
mhm,
wasting. This is why things are not working in this country. He's not thinking that way. So you have a situation where for more than 30 years, you have a generation, majority of the country, they've never seen good, efficient governance. They've never seen things working in the country, and they've accepted that this is how it is.
mhm,
It's more difficult to dig ourselves out of the place we are now
mhm,
than if we had started in the 80s or in
mhm.
the 70s to
Yes.
dig out. So,
Yes, and even so, I must note that even when the Zigs and the Awos and so on were in charge of the country, um, there was a lot of criticism
oh, of
about the
course, of
way,
course, of course.
about the way they ran the country. We haven't had the kind of luck that a country like Malaysia, like Singapore, um, have had in transformative leaders. Of course, people like Awolowo and Zik, even Tafawa Balewa,
Amadu Bello.
Ahmadu Bello, had a kind of intelligence quotient which they could articulate themselves and their vision in a way that our current crop of leaders are absolutely incapable of, right?
Mhm.
So our current leaders would sort of repeat this hackneyed phrase about, I'm here to move the state forward,
Carry everybody along.
carry everybody along, or I'm going to deliver the dividends of democracy, which I think was in Obasanjo's inaugural
Speech.
speech, and everybody thought, oh, this is so brilliant, and so every politician in the country began to talk about delivering the dividends of democracy. So one of the things that I noticed is, yes, I said when Zik and Awo were the central political figures, Ahmadu Bello and Tafawa Balewa and so on, there was even so the sense that the country was far from meeting its potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's happened now is that we're falling so cataclysmically that it's almost like a universal given that the one measure of government in Nigeria, but at the federal and state levels, is if they can somehow build some roads, so every governor um, in a state who takes over speaks about how many kilometers of roads he has tarred, you know, um, and Nigerians and the other sort of measure of achievement is to pay salaries, because we came to a point where um, Nigerian governments um, felt the salaries were optional. The payment of salaries became optional. Interestingly, my mother-in-law, who lives with us, has a caregiver who is Ghanaian, and she just started last week. And she was telling us that she and her husband lived somewhere in Oyo State. Her husband, who is a Ghanaian, was a school teacher in a secondary school in Oyo State. And she said they had to leave after 3 years because for 4 months the husband was not paid. And somehow he found his way to America, and then about a year later brought his family. So they've been in America for 20 some years. So that tells you, I mean, how we have settled, but when I went to secondary school, we still had some books in the library. We had meals that were not very good, but were respectable. The last time I visited my high school, it was unrecognizable, despite the fact that they had done my secondary school, which is what we call it in Nigeria, they'd made some changes, but just the quality of the place, into what I might call the software of the place, the absence of books, the fact that the kids had no access to computers and so on, that the lab was a shambles and so on. So I'm wondering if you can trace sort of the trajectory from when I'm much older than you, but at least when you were growing up, you still saw a vestige of a competent Nigeria, which we didn't know was competent at all, but it's only competent in relation to today, where it's a total breakdown. But can you sort of account for this trajectory where the country goes from some level of competency, which still left a lot to be desired, to the level we have today, which is total chaos and disaster?
Um, when every generation they will always say, look back and say the good old days,
Mm-hmm.
the good old days. I don't think um, people today, maybe they do, because I don't belong to them, their group. I don't think they will say the good old days. I mean, if you look at it, like let's say administration of Buhari and what's going on now,
Mm-hmm.
people will consider the Buhari days as the
The
good.
good old days.
Yeah, good old.
Yes.
And then, of course, if you think about the Jonathan days,
Mm-hmm.
just on the terms of the exchange rate of the naira and the
Mm-hmm.
dollar and what you can do with your pay, you will call it the good old days. That
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan's days were the good old days. Um, but I think we've gotten to the point where it's difficult for anybody to imagine something worse. I remember when Buhari came in, people were saying that the naira will get to 2,000 naira to a dollar. It was unthinkable that it would
Mm-hmm.
happen.
Mm-hmm.
But Tinubu did
We're,
it.
we're,
Did it.
we're in that territory
Yeah, did
now.
it in less than 2 years. He was
Yes.
able to
Mm-hmm.
move it to that point. So nothing is totally impossible. But for me, growing up, I was measuring Nigeria with what I was reading that time. There were not access to internet and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. What I was reading about other parts of the world. So like I told some of my students, I woke up in the morning I listen to a BBC, Voice of America. My dad puts them on every morning. So I get to hear about what is happening in the other parts of the world. I knew that Nigeria was not anything close to that. I had pen friends across the world, and they were writing me. They were telling me about their lives. I was seeing pictures of places like Australia, Jamaica, and other places. And I felt Kenya. I felt, that Nigeria is lacking in so many ways. But today, I went to Kenya eventually, and I saw that Kenya is more organized, better than Nigeria. Life there is more meaningful, even though we have more resources than they do. So I think without everybody knows, I think that the 80s, the politicians during that era, 80s and 90s, though you can say under military mostly, the country there was still hope, redemption. Right now, I'm not sure for the people who are proposing that things could change, unless there is a big social change, transformation, which I don't know how it's going to happen. It's not going to be achieved by their gradual process. I just listened to the president today in his first media chat. It was horrible. Just listening to him, there's no way you can think that man and what comes out from his mouth, that he has a good understanding of how terrible things are, or where to take the country to. Yeah.
So, very there's a lot that from what you said that can be unpacked. I remember feeling you talked about going to Kenya for the first time, and a similar experience when I went to Kenya. But for me, the most sort of an experience that I've spoken about on numerous occasions is my first visit to Uganda, which was in 2001. I've since been there several other times. But on that visit, several things stood out for me that I have not forgotten. In fact, that remain even more memorable as events in Nigeria, continue to deteriorate. So I arrived at Entebbe Airport, and I was welcomed. I'd been invited there by the U.S. consulate to give workshops to writers there. And so a driver from the embassy, U.S. consulate, picked me up. And the first thing was that he spoke, somebody who's a driver, that he spoke very clear, very correct English. And as we drove from Entebbe Airport into the center of Kampala, as I looked on both sides, I could see that there was electricity. So I said to this driver, I said, "What's the electricity situation like in Uganda?" And he said, "Bad." And I said, "How bad?" He said, "Very bad." And I said, "How often do you suffer power failures?" He said, "Once or twice a week." And I said, "For how long?" He said, "Sometimes up to 2 hours." So it turned out that what was happening was that they will have load shedding. And if you read the newspaper every morning, they will tell you the sections that will lose power at a certain time, and they will tell you when the power will be returned. But for a driver in Uganda who wanted this country to be held to the same standard as every developed country, wanted regular, uninterrupted power, it was not good enough to lose power once or twice a week. Interestingly, I stayed in Uganda exactly for a week. In that week, I did events in 3 hotels. In that same week, there were receptions for me in 3 residences, 3 homes. In not one of those places did I encounter a power failure. So that tells you how unusual it was, so that I could stay in Uganda for 1 week and really not experience power failure, right? And excuse me. So the next day after I arrived, the writers in the writers group that had gone to give workshops to held a reception for me. They had bought a small property in the center of Kampala with funds that had been provided by some European country. And so after a while, I needed to use the bathroom, see. But I figured, knowing Nigeria, that the bathroom would be very dirty. And so I kept saying to myself, I might as well wait until I return, until I got back to my hotel. But, the conversation continued. So I really needed to ease myself. So I asked them to show me the toilet. The toilet was so clean that you could eat food inside the toilet. Okay. So when they were about to drop me, I then assumed that the water in this residence, this house that the writers group had bought, must have come from a borehole. I didn't imagine that it could come from government. It could come from public works, right? So as we were going, I said to them, I said to them, this the water supply you have in your office. I said, it's from a borehole, right? And they said they didn't understand what borehole meant. They said, what do you mean? I said, you must have dug your own borehole to supply the water in your building. And they said, no. I said, so where do you get the water? And they said, public water. So I said to them, what percentage of the city of Kampala has access to running water? Again, they didn't understand my question. They said, what do you mean? I said, there must be a lot of homes, a lot of offices, a lot of sections of Kampala with no access to water. And they said, no, that there is a code in the city. If you build a house, there's a fee you must pay to the municipal authorities, and then you have water provided. And what struck me was that after I got back to Lagos, because this was when my wife and I were teaching at the University of Lagos, I was meeting with a group of friends subsequently, and I told them what I had found in Uganda. And one of them said to me, oh, are you comparing us with Uganda? What is their size? And I said to him, I said, you are being boastful about your incompetence. I said, what you should be asking is, what is their resource? This is a country with very, very limited resource, but they're able to provide public water. They're able to provide more or less steady electricity. And so the point that I'd like to get to, you made the point earlier that the best of Nigerians tend to leave and then to thrive outside of the country. But there's nevertheless some kind of contradiction that I find in the same Nigerians, is that after they leave, that a lot of them are part of in the discourse of a Nigerian, the conversations around Nigeria and its failures. That a lot of us who have left the country, who are living in other climes, other countries, and doing well, nevertheless find it easy, even attractive, to become apologists for the mess in our country, that we remain apostles of some ethnic collectivity or some religious, narrow religious argument. So that I sort of speak about Nigerians, some Nigerians, obviously, I hope it goes without saying that this is not a blanket statement about Nigerians, but that too many Nigerians, when you speak about corruption in the country, they wait to hear the name of the person who is implicated. If the person who is corrupt happens to be Igbo, you find Igbo people rush out to defend the corrupt person. If the person who is accused of corruption is Yoruba, you find some Yoruba people feel that it's their moral duty to defend corruption because in the name of their ethnic solidarity or something. Or if it is a Muslim who's stolen money or a Christian, you find members of that religious faith come out and stand behind, and sometimes we say is our son, and so on. And one moment of that happened on a trip years ago to London, and Kayode Ogundamisi was interviewing me on a show that he had at the time, and Jonathan was the president. And I was saying how disappointed I was in Jonathan, that as somebody from an oil producing area, he'd done very little to address the structural developmental issues in the country, even in the Niger Delta area. And a man called in, it was a calling program, and said, you have to be objective. Jonathan is achieving a lot. So I said to him, what has he achieved? And he said he's building some roads. And this is a person who was living in the UK. So I said to him, you live in the UK, right? He said, yes. I said, have you ever heard the British Prime Minister or the Mayor of London speak about building roads as their achievement? And his response was, you cannot compare us to Britain, which is a very peculiarly colonialist, inferior thinking, to believe that, the British are special, so they can have real achievements. For us, we'll settle for road construction and so on. And so I said to him, why would you not compare Nigerian leaders or Nigeria to the UK? I said, after all, our president gets paid a lot more. In fact, our governors get paid a lot more than the British Prime Minister. Okay, so why is it, in your view, that both Nigerians who are inside the country, and there are quite a few of us who have left the country, find it or do not recognize the absurdity of justifying or apologizing for the tragedy in progress that is Nigeria? I'm sorry that I've taken so long.
No, I understand. I wanted to point out that one of the reasons they always give also is the one about America has been there for 200
precisely. Yeah, they tell you, yeah. So this guy, by the way, said to me, Rome was not built in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so so it's important that you raise that point, because then my response was, I said, let's say that it took 100 years to build Rome, or even 200 years. So I said to him, to this anonymous scholar, I said, if it took the original Rome 100 or 200 years to build Rome, they have left us a template. Okay, so they have built it and they've left us a template. If you come back 2,000 years later and you say, okay, Rome took 100 years to build Rome, so we're going to take 100 years building our own, I said, that's already an admission of failure, because you have the template. Rome was doing trial and error. They will move forward, figure it out, see what's wrong, and then fix things and so on. But we keep making that argument. So please address it.
Yeah, and things are mechanized now than when they built
Rome.
So that's not people. Yeah, people say things like that, but at the heart of it all is that people are not yet evolved. The fact that we live abroad does not mean that people have been able to imbibe things that made the countries where they live function well. They've not learned it. Some people don't know. There are some people in America for 40 years. If you ask them why is America functioning well, better than where they come from, they don't know. They don't understand the core things, that because they are too busy, trying to make a living, trying to work and survive and take care of people at home. But some of them don't have the interest, really. Not just they don't have the interest. They just exist in those societies. It takes a lot to be able to understand. For instance, one of the things that we all have, when you come from Africa, most of the time you are given a wrong impression about Black people in Britain, Black people in America, how they ended up in the places they are, the situation they are. It will take personal study, personal efforts to understand what's behind that. Nobody will teach you in school. And most of our people here, they don't know it, they don't learn it. And if you hear them talk, you see that they've not evolved. They are still saying things that their uncle, like your uncle in your memoir, that Never Look at America.
Okay,
Yeah, they are still carrying the same story their uncles told them before they left home, even though they've been here for years, because they don't have time to study. They don't have the energy or the inclination. So that's why you find those things. Some of them also, because I said this, and to their own defense, really, because of the we play with injustice in Nigeria. Over time, people tell their stories of the Nigerian experiences. They call it when Nigeria happens to you. There are people who experience some terrible things in Nigeria that they close their mind from learning or even thinking about how to make it better. So what they do is that they now fall back to that default position. If they are only interested in their ethnic group, that's what they're interested in. They don't care what else you're saying. They will defend their ethnic group. If they're only interested in their religion, and that's a prison, they see everything. Or they're attacking Christianity, they're attacking Islam. That's all he sees. He doesn't see anything more than that. So that's something that is as a result of what the country did to a lot of our people. A lot of people are damaged. We don't treat post-traumatic people.
Yeah, we don't. We don't.
Pass through trauma in Nigeria.
Yeah. So I was just talking 2 days ago. Sorry, I got a call from a Somali writer friend of mine. I met him maybe 12 years ago or so. I was in New York at City College to moderate a conversation with Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan novelist. And so he and I met. And then a few years later, he told me he was returning to Mogadishu. And he was staying in a hotel in Mogadishu. And one day that hotel was bombed by terrorists. He happened to be lucky that he wasn't there, but he lost everything because the hotel was really demolished. Excuse me. And so I heard from him after the attack. He called me from Mogadishu telling me he was trying to make his way back to the US. And then he called me 2 days ago. And what he said was, first of all, he came back to America and became homeless. And so he's in New York, and he says he just, stayed in 2 shelters, and finally he's in the second shelter is a refurbished hotel. So he says it's, more conducive than the first place where he stayed in a more open communal place. But he told me that he was also seeing a therapist, so which is something that we don't do. People don't see therapists. And he said that in the years, I think he stayed for 3 or 4 years that he lived in Mogadishu, he said he saw so much that was destructive to his psyche. But he said that violence and horror had been normalized for him, and he didn't realize it until he came back here, and he said he was doing some really terrible things, both to himself and to others, and that finally he's been seeing a therapist. And he says to me, you know what Oyibo therapists do is basically they listen to you as you tell your story. He said, but in telling that story, you bring out these monsters that sort of lay dormant within you, but nevertheless activate your behavior in very unhealthy ways. So it's interesting that you spoke about the fact that we carry what Nigeria has done to us with us. Um, I remember I was a child. I've written about this in an essay called My Biafran Eyes. I was a child just before the war started, the civil war in Nigeria. And I saw a lot of horror. Okay, so during the war, as refugees, we were living in a community as refugees, and I remember Nigerian fighter jets coming and strafing basically a line of cars on in this town, and the occupants of those cars were burnt to a crisp. So you saw somebody gripping the tire, the wheel, who's become blackened. Like as if you've set meat on charcoal fire and forgot it for hours and hours, and that's human. And as a child, I saw that, and it's a memory that is very much there. On another occasion, my siblings and I and some other kids had gone to fetch firewood. Um, we saw a fighter jet come, it was flying really low, and we could see the bomb, this huge metallic egg, as it came down and then detonated with this most horrific boom, sound. And from where we were fetching firewood, it looked to us as if that's where we lived with our parents as refugees, that the bomb fell. And so you can imagine now the terror of children feeling that we're going to come back with wood and our parents will no longer be there. We came back and it happened that our parents' home, where we lived, which wasn't our home, where we were refugees, had been spared, but the bomb had actually fallen on the building where we went to school, the elementary school at the time. On another occasion, my parents had taken me to a relief place where some food was given that had been donated by a charitable organization. And as we stood in line, a man who was a few paces in front of us just crumbled and fell. And so as other men gathered and carried him away, I was, of course, as a kid, looking to see, and my parents were sort of using their bodies to block me from seeing what was happening. But of course, I never went to therapy for this, right? And I remember years ago that I had gone to give a talk someplace, and a white woman who was in the audience said to me that I was a very funny and happy person, and said, how could I manage to be so well adjusted, to be a witty and funny person, despite the horrors that I had seen as a kid? And that was the first time that it occurred to me to ponder that question. And I think that our luck is that, unlike a society like this one, that we have in our societies, that people are able to talk more openly. Of course, people drown themselves in alcohol, right? So that becomes a way of coping. People drink themselves to stupor. People fall in gutters and spend the night there, right? And then the next day they go out drinking and nobody stops them. But a lot of times we do not recognize that this is all part of the horror, part of the trauma that we're living out, in ourselves. So it's just a way of responding to the point that you just made, that Nigeria happens to us, and that when Nigeria happens to you, it's often, you sort of, when people think about their country, right? You and I are now American citizens, right? There are so many things that we don't like about America, but then there are other things that we like about America. Okay, I can't see ways in which Nigeria has become beneficent to me, where I will say, I'm so proud because of this thing that Nigeria represents to me, you know. So, how can people heal? Is it possible for people to heal from this? So, that's one question that I'd like to ask. But I might as well ask another follow up question that has occurred to me as you answered the last question. If, as you say, that the experience of Nigeria happening to you, the trauma that comes with that, sort of encourages people to retreat into their ethnic Bantustans, as it were, or into their religious confinements, then what would you say about the clamor for the division of the country into separate units? You know, the Oduduwa Republic, Biafra, Arewa, and so on. Do you sometimes sort of feel tempted to say that this might be a viable answer to the crisis in Nigeria? So, if you take my first question about how do people heal, how do people confront the trauma of Nigeria happening to you, okay? And when you know, whenever you finish, you know, there's something that I just watched today, which I'd like to raise with you as
Okay.
well.
Yeah, the healing part is what people are looking for is a sign of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But they are not seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
They will be forgiven. They will be able to say, we put it aside and move forward if
Mm-hmm.
there is hope. But every day things are getting worse and worse. Let me give you an example. This is how it illustrates what's going on in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
There is erosion everywhere, and
Mm-hmm.
you have not controlled the erosion, and
Mm-hmm.
you are constructing roads. You're just wasting time, resources, and money because the
Mm-hmm.
erosion will take it down,
Mm-hmm.
take everything out. So when people look at Nigeria, if they see, let's say someone wanted to get into the NDA, Nigerian
Mm-hmm.
Defense Academy, and I know a lot of people who call into the show, and
Mm-hmm.
their anger is all about what they went through when they took the
Yes.
exam. They were one of the best, and they couldn't get in because they are
Mm-hmm.
from the south, they are from this part of the country because they don't know any general. It's permanent. They
Mm-hmm.
can't get over that.
Mm-hmm.
If they see that today anybody who takes common entrance examination to federal government colleges, that people go in by merit, that's a healing. It will help them to heal.
Mm-hmm.
They will be
Mm-hmm.
able to say, okay, this
That things
country
have
that made
changed.
me, things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
But when they look and they see that it's even getting worse, then that their unhealed trauma
Mm-hmm.
will continue to make them have negative perception
Mm-hmm.
of what is going on in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how, if there are signs of changes, I think people are willing, they will be willing to forgive and forget
Mm-hmm.
and say that things are improving. But if there are no signs, in fact, if they are seeing worse situations than what they encountered,
Mm-hmm.
then why not? And then about the, I've been writing columns too for years, and I've
Mm-hmm.
written things like Destroy This Temple,
Mm-hmm.
where I basically propose that Nigeria is just like a council flat, you know, what they call council flats
In the UK.
in the UK. Here we
Mm-hmm.
call it projects in
Mm-hmm.
America. So if you remember the housing dichotomy in America, it's really what they did. So
Mm-hmm.
they put black people in projects here in America and
Mm-hmm.
gave white people who came back from the Second World War, they gave
Mm-hmm.
them houses on Long Island
Mm-hmm.
that they owned.
Mm-hmm.
So black people were kept on projects. And if you've been in one of those buildings, what you will notice is that there's so many people there. And of course, conflicts. And it gets to a point where they are in disrepair because the government, anything government is handling, they can't fix things. So the question is, do you continue to maintain this building, try to maintain the building where the structures are their integrity is now in doubt? Or do you bring down the building and build small buildings and let people live in small houses instead of putting them in one big building? So I've thought about that, of course, depending on the nature of what's going on in the country. It will remain an option, not because the Biafrans fought a war. No, it will remain an option even for the Yoruba, for different ethnic groups who were, remember, they were countries or they were nations before the Europeans came. So it will remain an option for them each time things are not going well. I tell people that in America, if America starts losing its standing in the world, if it becomes, if it doesn't work for most people, California will leave, Texas will leave, so many states will leave the
New
union.
York, maybe,
Yeah, they will leave the union. That California, they don't need America to survive. You know, if they leave, they will be the sixth largest economy in the world. So what keeps any nation is if it's working for majority of the people. If there is still legitimate effort to make it a more perfect union. We have not started to define the union. I don't think the union in Nigeria is defined. Other countries are trying to make their union more perfect. Our own, we're yet resisting that need.
Because I remember that